Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a very unusual and interesting topic to cover today, don't we, Landon?
Yes, very unique.
It
But
absolutely
becoming
is.
less unique, I think, every day.
That's it. It is becoming less unique. Unless you've been under a rock, you've been hearing about near-death experiences recently. Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow, Thom Harrison, the recent Doomsday family, influenced by people that have had near-death experiences. It seems like everywhere we look now, these things are becoming more and more common, or people are just more comfortable talking about them. Is that how you kind of see it, Landon?
Yeah, I think so. I'm 55, so every day is a near-death experience for me. But
Well, thanks, Landon, because I'm older than you are. So what does that say about me?
that's right. But we're certainly starting to see them in all the Tim Ballard things.
Yep.
We're seeing the movie that just came out from Angel Studios.
Yep.
We just saw a trailer with someone saying that they had a near-death experience to produce the movie about the Book of Mormon. It seems to be that you can't do anything unless you have a near-death experience nowadays.
That's right, to back it up. Yeah, and we went and saw, it's another Angel Studio production, Near Death, last night. And that was all about people from all over the world who have had near-death experiences. And then it's true, we did learn that the upcoming movie, The Oath, also involved a near-death experience from the director and producer, I think. So what we wanted to do, because this seems to be just everywhere, we wanted to kind of study a little bit about what a near-death experience actually means and talk about the actual science behind it. So now we're not near-death experts, are we, Landon?
Only our age, again.
Only our age, and we're not scientists. Exactly. But we have done quite a bit of research. And so we thought we would bring you that in this episode just to kind of talk our way through the actual brain science behind it. Now, one of the most well-known near-death experiences, I think, is Chad Daybell. He wrote a series of books in which he mentioned his near-death experiences. Can you read that, Landon? Let's talk about what happened to Chad, just to dive right in.
Sure. On a warm August day in 1985, when Chad was 17 years old, he stood on the edge of a 60-foot tall cliff at Flaming Gorge Reservoir in northeastern Utah, about to take a leap that he believes changed the entire trajectory of his life. At the exact second his feet left the earth and his body dropped toward the water, it was as if a door opened below and he fell right through it, into another place, into another dimension. When he hit the water, it felt like I had slammed into concrete, he recalled. A shock went through my entire body and I saw a flash of white light. I felt an audible pop at the base of my skull and I thought, oh no, I broke my neck. At the top of his skull, he could feel his spirit exiting his body, spilling out through the crown of his head, but getting snagged in the process. It was unable to fully detach from his skull. As the world fell away from him, a new one around him was opening, like a giant eye wakening from sleep, and he was its pupil. This was the other side of the veil, where Chad saw an endless white plain spreading in all directions. There was music. It was warm. A friend swam out and pulled him to safety. For a week afterward, the jump stayed with him. Sometimes my right eye would just go blind, but if I hit the side of my head with my palm, I could see again. He didn't tell anyone of this out-of-body experience or the plane of whiteness he'd seen. He believed that when he hit the water, he had transported somewhere else.
Yeah, and this was written by Leah Sotilli, who wrote When the Moon Turns to Blood, which is an excellent story on Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. And so she's just recounting here what he said about his near-death experience. And what's interesting about this is that he didn't really tell anybody he had had one until another author that we're going to talk about later, started to become really popular with her, NDE. That is the acronym for near-death experience, NDE. And then he suddenly kind of remembered, oh, I had this experience, which he hadn't really shared with family or anyone else. But this is kind of the gist of a near-death experience. So NDEs started gaining popularity, I think, due to more people having them because more people are resuscitated. I think that has to be a huge part of it. So the idea that near-death experiences, also known as NDEs, offer proof of an afterlife for the soul has been remarkably persistent despite an accumulation of scientific evidence to the contrary. Such claims have existed in historical record since at least Plato's time. time. The earliest known account of a near-death experience appeared in the 5th century BC, but they aren't widely popularized until the 1970s, when American physician and philosopher Raymond Moody published his bestseller, Life After Life, based on his collection of 150 coma survivors' reports. And I'm going to say that we're relying heavily on several different really good articles about this, and we will attribute those in our slides. But for our listeners, the article is called The Afterlife in Our Heads, The Real Meaning of Near-Death Experiences by Christian French. And so we'll be linking that in the show notes. So I don't know, do you remember this book at all, Landon? You were probably too young, but I remember some older friends of mine reading it and seeing it at some of their parents' house.
Yeah, I was not familiar with the book, although I think anyone growing up in that time period heard all these stories about how you'd see a light and the different ideas that what life after death might be like. I think were pretty popular in that time. Moody actually plays a big role in the movie that we went to see, After Death, that's produced by Angel Studio. Moody himself, wasn't he a physician, if I remember, or a psychologist? I think he was a psychologist and started studying these, and then some physicians started looking into it as well. The movie, obviously produced by Angel Studios, is there to affirm that God really exists because of these these experiences of NDEs. They want to say, well, we can't, they're all so similar that it must be true. And we're going to look into that and see how truthful that is.
Exactly. Let's look at our next slide. So popularity beginning in the 60s and 70s and not stopping at all. I went on Amazon and I typed in near-death experiences and over 8,000 entries of books and all kinds of media having to do with the near-death experience. So people are increasingly interested, I think, in this.
Yeah, and I think you said that if it's related to CPR, that a lot of NDEs are associated with CPR, and so it would make sense with CPR. It's not that new, it's not that old, that procedure, and the medical sciences and what they can do now. That more people would have approached that death. Knocked at death's door and then been able to come back because of the resuscitation techniques. And so as a result, you get a lot more of these books. And it's seeming now in popular culture that unless you had an NDE, you're not an expert or able to speak on on why you did something. It almost seems like, at least in Mormon culture, that you have to have had one of these experiences, which, as we find out, I think from some of the things you're going to explain, a lot of people who haven't necessarily died have these. So we'll get into some of that, but that explains why so many of these. In fact, Chad Daybell really didn't practically die. He, he felt like he was going to die.
Exactly.
And that brought his NDE.
That's right, because there was no resuscitation that he recounted in that experience. He was just pulled up and swum to shore. I mean, maybe he did get resuscitated, but he didn't mention that part of it. So, but we'll get into that a little more later. Okay. Mormons love NDEs. So in her book, and this is where it really starts to get popular, in her book, A Greater Tomorrow, suggests in the description that Julie Rowe was in 2004 a happy wife and a mother before her health took a turn for the worse. While in a weakened state, her spirit left her body and entered the spirit world. The book description reads, an ancestor named John greeted her and showed her many wonderful places there. He also allowed her to read from the book of life, which showed her a panorama of the earth's past, present, and future. Julie saw the lives of many historical figures, such as Adam and Eve, Enoch, Noah, and Moses. She witnessed the Savior's mortal life, including his crucifixion and resurrection. She also saw the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ through the prophet Joseph Smith and key events that have led to the church's growth. So she is extremely popular among Mormons as far as somebody that's had near-death experience. Her experiences influenced Chad Daybell to then remember and recount his experience. And I have to say, don't you think, Landon, that a lot of people give a lot of credibility to people that have had these NDEs, especially in the Mormon culture, sort of the idea that the veil is thin and the idea that these people may have special powers, special information, special knowledge that we're supposed to pay attention to?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I believe Deseret Book published a lot of these books, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely it's playing greater and greater into the Mormon culture, these near-death experiences. And amazingly, they're almost always within the Mormon culture. The person dies and they have a Mormon death experience.
Exactly. Like this one, seeing the church restored, seeing Joseph Smith, seeing the church's growth. Absolutely. It's very interesting. All right, let's go to our next slide. Okay, so I went on to a Mormon dialogue and discussion board just to see if anybody had talked about NDEs. Anybody had done any kind of an informal poll of what Mormons think about NDEs. So I thought this was kind of interesting. Do you want to read through some of these results, Landon?
Yeah, I'm going to turn a little bit and look at the bigger screen here. What is your primary general perception of so-called near-death experiences? The first one is hallucinations and or spasms of an oxygen-starved brain. About 14% believe that that's the case. Exaggeration and or fabrication, only 4% believe that that's the case. Evil or satanic deception, nobody believes that. So that's interesting. Potentially plausible and educational, only if they support LDS teachings for my belief system, if my belief system, if not LDS. That was 6%. So 6% said it's educational, but only if it supports mine. If they say something different, then there's nothing for me to learn from it. So potentially plausible and educational, whether or not they support LDS teachings. That one is 51%. So that one is by far and away the leader. Too confusing and are too variable for conclusions to be drawn, about 14% for that. Irrelevant, 2%. No opinion, 4%. I'm not touching this topic with a 10-foot pole, 2%. And other was 2%. So by far and away, potentially plausible and educational, whether or not they support LDS teachings is the biggest.
Yeah. And that's a pretty open-minded view right there, because I would have thought that perhaps the other one would have been a little higher, that I believe in it as long as it confirms, how I've been living my life in my religious construct. But seems like people are a little open-minded about this. So, but people are talking and thinking about it. That's what this survey says to me too. And again, this is completely informal, just on a discussion board. So I'd be curious if there were more.
I think you've got to look at it and stand back a little bit and say, so many of these near-death experiences aren't just by Mormons. And therefore, if you were to limit it and say, well, it has to fit a Mormon thing, then you'd have to say, well, everyone else is lying then.
Yeah.
So in order to accept that your belief that, that the people that share something similar to what you believe are credible, you have to give credibility to other people who have also passed on, who aren't of your faith, who had a similar experience. So,
yeah, that's a very good point. Absolutely. All right. Let's see what else we have. All right. I went onto some church websites and I didn't do a deep dive. I'm sure there's more, but in my just thinking about it, near-death experiences are very in line with what the church teaches. Like if you're in fast and testimony meeting and somebody gets up and says, I had this experience, I felt like I was dying, I saw the other side, nobody's going to think that you're crazy. That fits right in line with what everybody's saying. I grew up with two immediate family members who had NDEs, and I grew up with that. That was just part of what we heard about, what we talked about. We knew this had happened to these family members, and they brought it up fairly often, and nobody batted an eye. It was just what happened. So I kind of feel like there's a lot there to support it. I pulled out two things off the church website. Just like I said, it was very quick going through the question, where is the spirit world? President Brigham Young taught that the spirits of those who once lived on earth remain around us on this earth, although we can't see them. So communing with spirits, people who have passed on before, seeing them, being taught by them, talking to them, that's very common in Mormon culture and thought. Another question, can spirits in the world still see us? Yes, when needed. This is off the church website. President Joseph F. Smith said that those in the spirit world can see us more clearly than we can see them. that their solicitude for us and their love for us and their desire for our well-being must be greater than that which we feel for ourselves. So that idea that there are just wonderful people who care about us so much, that are very close, if we could just break through that veil and see them, that's very prevalent. How do you feel about that idea, Landon?
Yeah, and I think that just supports regular Christian belief that the spirits of your relatives are just on the other side waiting for you, and that they maybe interact with you at times. Guardian angels has always been kind of a thing, that it might be one of your dead relatives comes back as a guardian angel. I think of the movie I'll Build You a Rainbow. Remember that from the 70s, where his mom dies and she says, I'll build you a rainbow. And then
Landon's
the
singing.
rainbow. And, so mom is very close by, and she's interacting with him through a rainbow or sending him a sign. I think, but popular fiction, you see that, or popular culture, you see the same thing. Remember the movie Ghost and the pottery scene, of course.
Oh, wow, Landon, that was decades ago, yet you're still talking about that.
That was decades ago. Yes. I think the well-known pottery scene, but there's the ghost in that one where she comes back. Yes. So
exactly.
I think it's popular all the way around. And I think LDS just accept it with everyone else in Western culture, that spirits interact with you. It's growing up in Western culture.
I think that is very true too. And I like this painting. I've seen so many memes of this. It's an older woman reaching out to Christ, but I've seen memes that say things like, oh, that cup of coffee you had when you were 30, you can't come in. Terrible, but it's still a nice painting. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so now we get to the dark side of NDE. And I think this is why we're sort of talking about this today. This is why it's been in the news everywhere. Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow. Here's a book called Visions of Glory, written by John Pontius, about a man's experiences, Thom Harrison. Now, if you've not watched I think it's like 14 hours long. No, it's only about 6 hours long. Mormon Stories episode talking about Thom Harrison and Visions of Glory, you have got to watch that, because it explains all the ties with these near-death experiences and the people that are having them. We also have a picture on the screen of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell when they were in Hawaii being served paperwork or warrants that they had to produce the children. And if you look at the book she's reading there on her lounge chair, it is Visions of Glory. Now, Thom Harrison is also someone who had visions for Tim Ballard, and told Tim Ballard that he would not only be president of the United States someday, that he would also be the prophet of the LDS Church. And Thom Harrison had near-death experiences. So that's what I mean about when someone says they've had a near-death experience, people give them a lot of credibility. Like, what they say holds weight, and they often take action based on what these people say. And that's why I call it the dark side of NDE, because, that kind of power over people, that cannot end well, as we've seen in a lot of things recently in the news. Even the Doomsday Family, where a mother and her brother, basically kidnapped their own child, saying he was the Davidic servant. They sort of listened to Julie Rowe, and they listened to Abraham Gileadi. That's another one from back in the day. These are all tied together. It's just a big, deep, dark rabbit hole. But one of the very common denominators and the string that kind of binds, in my mind, all these together are these near-death experiences. So have you read Visions and Glory, Landon, or do you remember any family members reading that at all?
I haven't. Was it available at Deseret Book?
I believe that it was available.
I think
that's
it
what I'm
was.
saying.
And
yeah.
It's incredible. I'm standing back and I'm kind of going, maybe having a near-death experience is not a good thing, because as I look at these names we just read, Thom Harrison was threatened with excommunication unless he, rejected it. Julie Rowe was excommunicated. Gileadi was excommunicated. Chad Daybell, I don't know if he's been executed or excommunicated yet, or he may be executed yet. But excommunicated. Tim Ballard has now been excommunicated. All of these people who seem to have written a book that was produced in Deseret Book to offer faith, and now they're all being excommunicated, which almost tells you that once you have a near-death experience, you seem to think that you now have a direct line to God, and that you speak for others. And a lot of people start believing you, and the brethren can't take that. And obviously
Right.
we see that it's having negative effects on people now following and believing something that is, they're willing to take that they themselves are prophetic and then start turning these weird ideas into actions, which have proven very, very bad on all sides of the popular people. I don't know. Do you know of anyone who's had a good NDE that has written a book and has read a book? I don't know.
Well, and I guess
they're
maybe
out there.
bad and good may not be the words to use. I mean, it's just, you have these experiences, but then you use it as a way to prop yourself up. Basically, you now become a prophet because you've talked directly to God or to Jesus, or the future, or you've seen Joseph Smith, all of that. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned all these people individually were disciplined. Their books were taken out of mainstream Mormonism from Deseret Book, although I still feel people are still reading them, yet you don't really hear from the pulpit, from general conference, look, everybody, if you have this experience, don't don't use it as a power play, to get other people to do what you want. So there's nothing really said from the top, but individually they're trying to go root it out. But I think it is a little too late. I mean, as you see that before the Doomsday Family, which was just this last week, all of us were saying, well, when is the next thing going to happen? Because this subculture exists, this belief in the NDE and what it means, and special messages telling you what to do. So we were not at all surprised that something else happened that was in the news. In fact, I keep thinking people seeing these stories in the news probably go, what is up with Mormons? I mean, if they really understand that a lot of these people are LDS, they're like, what is going on in Mormonism? It's too much to be a coincidence. And there's a chain that goes back. You've got Julie Rowe, you've got Abraham Gileadi, you've got Thom Harrison, I would even put Skousen in that. That's how I was raised. And so Royal Skousen, and some of those ideas were back then too, of just the other life, the veil being thin. I think we've all heard that. Haven't you heard that, Landon? The veil is thin. There's messages coming back and forth.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we were told that all the time, that you almost expected that when you went in the celestial room, in the temple, one of your relatives was going to be there to greet you and say hi in the spirit world. That I know the first time I went through, that's what I was expecting, was that, at some point I may see spirits here, because the veil, and that's the celestial room, and that's where we commune with spirits, is in the temple. I thought it was very interesting, though, when we went and saw the movie yesterday, because we go to quite a few movies. And since COVID, the movie theaters have been very empty. Hardly anyone's going to the movies anymore. You might get 25% capacity. It was packed when we went to see that yesterday. And there were a lot of people that were there to watch this. And I thought, how strange is it that Angel Studios would put this out after sound? And they even say right at the beginning of it, says, by the producers of Sound of Freedom, or by the whatever. And you're going, oh my gosh, with everything that's going on, you dare to put that on? And now you're talking, we know that Tim Ballard supposedly on his ketamine had these near-death like experiences and saw visions. And now you're out promoting them as true and faith promoting, when look at your own history right here of all the people who've had these. They're all getting excommunicated. So it's very weird, but people need to hear this because they want to hear this. They want to believe that their relatives right there on the other side, that death is going to be welcoming, that there's going to be calm and peace and reconnection. And they want to hear it, and this is giving it to them. And so that's the need I could see when I looked at that theater and said, look how many people are here. We went for the research for this and this
popcorn
podcast.
And the large
and the popcorn.
That's no doubt. Reason I go.
But I looked and I said, wow, there's really people out there that need to hear this. And I did notice something else. It was it seemed to be a rather older audience. There were some 20, 30-year-olds, but by far and large, the majority of it was older people. And you could tell it was pretty much faithful people, I would say, people who already believed in this. I don't know that this movie was going to convince people who don't believe.
And it definitely had the same as Sound of Freedom, which Landon and I have not seen, although I feel like we do need to go see that at some point. But it said at the end, pay it forward. This is very important. There's someone in your life that probably needs to see this, you know, and that process where you can buy a ticket to let everyone see it. So it'll be interesting to see how it takes off and what people say about it. I mean, it was a very fascinating movie, and they did interview all kinds of people, but I think we'll get into a little bit later some of the things that they perhaps left out. So let's go to our next slide.
It was definitely a very Christian film.
Yes,
how Christians
Christian
would view. They talk about other religions, but they move away from it real quickly, and we'll talk about some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Later.
All right. So now that we've kind of given a background about why we feel it's really important to talk about NDEs right now, because our actions seem to be driven by other people's experiences with NDEs or their own, we're going to dive in. And like I said, we're basing a lot of this on several articles that we read that were really good. This one is called The Afterlife in Our Heads, The Real Meaning of Near-Death Experiences. And we're just going to read a little bit, summarize a little bit, and just really dive in. So Landon, would you like to start with this first part here?
Yes, and this is by Kristen French, who wrote the article. But neuroscientists who study consciousness and have weighed the decades of research into NDEs told me these claims that consciousness survives death are not supported by the research. Though they are highly personal and often transformative for those who experience them, NDEs are nonetheless explained by psychological processes, they said, which have been pieced together over the past 50 years. In the decades since Moody published Life After Life, advances in critical care medicine and resuscitation science have made it easier to revive patients whose hearts have stopped, which has made it easier to systematically identify and study people who have had an NDE. Some estimates now suggest that between 4 to 15% of the global population and 10 to 23% of cardiac arrest patients have had an NDE. We now have a better grasp of how they happen, what purpose they may serve, and why they are so transformative for those who experience them. All the most basic level neuroscientists say when a person's brain changes in profound ways, as happens when that person goes into cardiac arrest, for example, their perceptions and emotions change in profound ways too.
Yep. So that's kind of a little overview of the concept. And that's exactly it. At that moment of near death or thinking that you're going to die, your brain chemistry and physiology changes, you know, night and day, and certain things happen. Certain processes begin to take place that result in some pretty crazy experiences. So let's learn a little more about that. Okay. And now this is a quote from Anil Seth, who's a professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience at the University of Sussex. And he says, having an out-of-body experience is not proof that the soul or the mind can leave the body and go floating about. Those who tout near-death experiences as something more than biological are confusing the content of the experience with the claim about the nature of the universe. There's a much more interesting explanation, which is that the location that we feel ourselves to be is something that is generated by the brain and can be changed when the brain is in a particular state. Now that's really interesting. And I love how he says that there's a more interesting explanation to us than simply have gone to another realm. And as we've studied that, we've discussed this, haven't we, Landon, that just realizing what your brain can do on levels that you're not at all aware of, now that's where the real mystery is. And that's where it's really amazing. So learning more about that has been absolutely fascinating, even to the point where you can feel like your brain can make you feel like you are somewhere else, sort of an out-of-body situation, which we're going to talk about later.
Yeah, we are a chemical reaction. That's what our bodies are. Everything we think, everything we do is chemical. Mm-hmm. And some of those chemicals combine to make electrical signals, but chemical and electrical is what causes our emotions. It's what changes, you know, how we feel, how we think, how we act, how we respond to fear or different things. It's always your body producing a chemical that goes, you know, into your brain or into your nervous system and makes you do something. Mm-hmm. And it's no different when we die. But it shouldn't be surprising that those chemicals inside your body react differently when your body's shutting down. It either is going to flood you with some sort of chemical, or it's going to withdraw certain other chemicals. And those chemical reactions are going to be fairly similar with different people. Although depending on what chemical it is, you may have a completely different reaction to it. But it shouldn't be surprising that 10 to 30% of people report having one reaction when they're near-death experience, while others report having no reaction to it, because their mind may be blocked out, where others is flooded by some chemical. So when you start understanding the brain and how it works, and that everything we do, the feelings we have, love, anger, all of those is generated by chemicals in our brain. So
yeah, it's hard to wrap your brain around that. It is. It really is. And that's why when he says it's a far more interesting explanation, I completely agree with that. Very fascinating.
And we can't get too emotionally invested, because the emotion is a chemical reaction.
That's right. That's right.
Done.
We'll try to keep it light here. All right, let's go to our next slide. So let's talk about what happens in a near-death experience. And this is a list created from, hours and hours and hours of research, thousands of patient accounts, several different sources put together. And it says, although NDEs vary from one person to another, they often include such features as the following. So Landon, do you want to read that list?
Yeah, a feeling of being very comfortable and free of pain. I think that's one that we hear about a lot. A realization of having died. At first, I think they don't know, they're kind of confused. Where am I? And then they see themselves or something and realize that they're dead. A loss of the fear of death. A sensation of leaving the body, sometimes being able to see the physical body while floating above it. A sense of the mind functioning more clearly and more rapidly than usual. A sensation of being drawn into a tunnel or darkness. A brilliant light, sometimes at the end of the tunnel. A sense of overwhelming peace, well-being, or absolute unconditional love. A sense of having access to unlimited knowledge. A paradoxical lucidity and a heightened sense of consciousness, awareness, and well-structured thought processes. A life review or recall of important events in the past. A preview of future events yet to come. Encounters with deceased loved ones or with other beings that may be identified as religious figures, and a special message you have been sent back to accomplish. And of course, everyone doesn't experience all of these. These are, the general ones that most people experience, and they experience some. They might feel one, they might feel 10, they might feel all of them. I had an experience, and I don't want to say near-death experience, but it kind of fits into this category. It's similar to Chad Daybell's, where I was on a boat and I jumped out to swim to shore, and I was about 150 yards offshore, and I was just going to swim back in. And when I did, I started swimming, and I'm a good swimmer. Didn't have a life jacket on. Let that be a lesson. Even if you're a good swimmer, you should have that life jacket on. And I was swimming towards the shore, and I got about halfway there, and I just, all of a sudden, my body just started sinking. And no matter what I was doing, I couldn't keep swimming. And I realized I'm going under and I'm going to die. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I realized that, this extreme peace came over my body. And I just went, well, this is where I die. And as I started going under, I landed in a tree. There was a tree under the water near the shore that had been covered up because it was springtime and the lake was high. And I landed in that tree and was able to hold on to it until I was able to recover and swim the rest of the way. But I remember that feeling of, oh my gosh, I thought I'd be panicking and doing this. And instead, my body just went, well, this is the end. This is how you die. And it was very peaceful. So you can have those experiences, and in that case, my body didn't leave or any, nothing like that. But I think most people, if they think back in their life, there was some experience where they thought they were going to die, where maybe they experienced some of these experiences.
Yeah, I think so too. And when I think about the family members, the immediate family members that I have that have had NDEs, that a lot of these things are very accurate, especially the part about meeting either a family member or a religious figure, being told in both cases, in one case, you're not supposed to be here. You need to go back. There's something special you need to do. That's special mission one. In the other case, you can decide if you want to go back and finish, your life, or there's like this choice, like this idea that, and both of them had that. And then I think about, as we were talking about it, I literally forgot that I had two experiences that I never thought of them as near-death experiences. But when I read this list, some similarities. One was after surgery, coming out of surgery, and I just had this total flood of I loved everybody, like so emotional and so just full of just love, almost like you could see love. And a lot of people say that. I can't, in the movie last night, they kept saying it's all about love,
Mhm.
And I thought, I know what that is. It's really weird. And then another scenario, which was a little more intense, when I was getting over a cold. It was about 10 years ago. I'd been home from work a couple of days. I was laying in bed in covers. I remember I was laying really flat down in bed, but still having a little trouble breathing, with my cold. And then I just kind of stopped breathing for a minute, and I knew I had stopped. And I just had this, again, this overwhelming, like this whole just love and peace, and it's all okay. I don't think I was near death, but something enough had stopped enough that my brain was doing something to me, and I snapped myself out of it right away. I literally said, knock it off, and I sat back up really fast. But I do know there was a moment where I could have kind of gone with it. Isn't that interesting? And we'll learn later that apnea can have some of the similar effects. So I do understand in a very small way what they're saying when they say that just this overwhelming, just enveloped with complete love and happiness. Normally I don't feel that way. I'm a very grumpy person, right? But no, it was very hard to describe. And I think it sounds a lot like what you're saying, just this piece where you're like, all right, there it is. So,
and I think most of us, when, like you said, the one you were coming out of surgery, which could very well be narcotics, and we'll talk about that. That
it
the
could be,
narcotics
and your
can
brain
also simulate,
reacting.
yeah, that same feeling of love. And I think a lot of people have. I remember when my son came out of surgery, he was like, "Oh,
Yeah, I love
he was
it.
just overwhelmed with love." And I think that that's probably the same chemicals that are being released when you have that experience, that you feel that deep love. And we'll talk about how those can experience. I think that last one there, a special mission you've been sent back to accomplish. When we just watched the preview to The Oath, where at the end, the guy says, I just had a near-death experience a month before this was produced, and come and see the movie to see why the Lord preserved me. He saw that his mission and the reason he was saved was to produce this movie about the Nephites and the Lamanites. It's a Nephite-Lamanite love story or something like that. And that's why he was saved. So I'm sure I was saved to come do Mormonish so that I could talk about not that.
We were both preserved to come. And again, ours are, yours was pretty serious. Mine, I think, were a little more light, but definitely there was some kind of change in my brain chemistry that was going on. So, and we'll get into that as we go on. All right, let's go to our next slide. What leads to an NDE? These are just some basic, very common things. The cardiac arrest is we read the statistic in the slide 2 back, where that's the most common because you're resuscitated, you've been out for a minute, the blood flow is actually leaving your brain, and that's a huge part of it. So cardiac arrest, septic or anaphylactic shock, electrocution, coma from a brain injury, hemorrhage, attempted suicide, near drowning, that's Landon, apnea, that's another one. So these are just some general things where your brain suddenly, blood is not, it's not functioning like it should, and parts of your brain that you do not realize exist, very, very deep level functions start taking over for you. So let's go to the next slide. This was extremely interesting to me. What else leads to NDE? Why don't you read that, Landon?
Yeah, NDEs are also reported by patients with serious but not immediately life-threatening diseases, and in those with major depression. Experiences that bear many similarities to NDEs can even happen in the terminal phases of illness or after situations in which death seems inevitable, such as mountaineering accidents. But NDEs can also occur in circumstances that do not bear any direct relation to imminent death or even fear of death, such as mediation. I think that's supposed to be meditation.
I think it is supposed to be
meditation or intense grief. NDEs experienced by patients whose hearts have stopped are no different from those experienced by people who simply fear death. For example, if someone is falling off of a mountain.
Now that is fascinating. To me, that's almost like the smoking gun of it. Don't you think, Landon?
Yeah, I think so. The fact that you don't have to actually die to experience the same thing that you're having in an NDE. And that's Chad Daybell. What he described is the same thing. He didn't actually die from it. And yet he says he actually saw his spirit, if you want to call it that, come out of his body and was looking down on him, which is something, like my experience of nearly drowning did not involve that, but his did. So, but that clearly was not he wasn't resuscitated. He wasn't taken to the hospital and was dead for an hour. He could have blacked out for a second when he said he hit concrete. It was like, well, yeah, when you jump off a 60-foot cliff, it does feel like concrete when you hit the water. Yeah, that's it's definitely a situation that is being influenced by your brain in that case, and the chemicals in your brain making that change.
Yeah, that's it. Your brain thinks you are dying. Like if you're falling, you're in a free fall, your brain thinks I'm dying. And so the chemicals that are released, the physiological process kicks in, and these experiences happen. But you didn't die. You weren't close to dying. I mean, in reality, even though your brain believes it, and yet you still have this out-of-body experience, you still go through that whole list that we saw in the last slide. So to me, that really says it's all taking place in your brain with those physiological processes.
And there's definitely different levels. Obviously, we've all heard the story of someone who's been dead and declared brain dead, and then they come back. And obviously that's a much deeper level of an NDE than somebody, but the reality is people are having the same experience, whether they think they're dying or whether they've been dead for an hour and then come back.
Yep, that's the key right there, which is why I say it's sort of the smoking gun, because your body never was dead, but you had that same experience. So what does an NDE feel like? NDEs are generally understood to begin with a feeling of detachment from the physical body, known as an out-of-body experience, or OBE. So many acronyms associated with this, aren't there, Landon? Followed by deep feelings of peacefulness, entering a gateway or a tunnel, seeing a bright light, and finally feeling a return to the body. It is the OBE that is perhaps the most defining element of the NDE. So most near-death experiences include some kind of out-of-body element, is what they're saying. Some 80% of people who report experiencing an NDE have one, according to the research of Stephen Laurie, a clinical professor of neurology who leads the coma science group at the University of Liège in Belgium. So that's a huge part of it. And I think if we think back to the movie that we saw last night, everyone had a feeling where their body, their spirit, something, their consciousness was aware that they were separated from their body. They could see their body, and in some cases chasing their body. One of the NDEs was somebody who'd crashed an airplane and his body was put in an ambulance, and he was literally chasing his body. His consciousness was chasing his body through the city streets trying to get to the hospital. And to most people that says, all right, I'm here, I'm a spirit, and my body is there. But there is research that says that, I don't even know how to explain it. How do you explain it, Landon? Just that your consciousness, your brain, right now we're very rooted into our physical body, but it's your brain that's really running the show, and it's not rooted there. And so it can give you a perception that you are literally somewhere else outside of being rooted in your physical body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've all had, not that a dream is the same thing, but we've all had dreams where, we're falling and we really feel like we're falling. We're not in our body, obviously. And then all of a sudden you jerk awake when you hit the ground. That's an example of your mind putting you outside your body, because your body is not falling, but your mind is telling you you're falling. So a very similar thing where, and you can actually see yourself falling and hit, like you're going to hit the ground, and yet you haven't. So it's very similar that you would see from outside, that your body's outside. You're surrounded by the sirens as you rush to the hospital, and your mind knows, oh, that I know this city and I must be going to the hospital, and your mind puts it in out there. It can fill in the blanks for you.
It can fill in the blanks. That's exactly right. And what an interesting example of the free fall. I had not thought of that, but that's absolutely true. I still remember a terrifying dream I had where I was swinging. I think I was a early tween, and I was swinging in my dream, and I flew off the swing, and I went up, and then I started coming down, and it was falling. Like, I was really falling, and I can still remember that, arms and legs and, terrified. I still remember that feeling, and my body was not falling. It was in bed, but my brain was making me fall. So I think it's a very common dream where your brain can take you out of your body.
And I think dreams tell us a lot, because dreams are, again, your mind and the chemicals and different things. But in a dream, we've all seemed to have the same dreams. All of us as humans, we all dream of ourselves on the playground in our underwear or something, and everyone's laughing at us. We all had that dream where we're running, but we're not going anywhere.
Right.
People's brains react very similarly, and, different people, different thoughts, but most of us have the same. So it wouldn't be surprising that near death, all humans everywhere around the world, that their brain acts the same when it's shutting down, and that they would see the same things no matter where they are in the world. And that's one of the things we want to look for in this.
Yeah, that is so interesting. All right, let's look at our next slide. Your brain and OBE, which is out of body experience. So it says, but a wealth of neuroscience research describes how OBE-like experiences, a loss of sense of self, and disturbed body perception or ownership, can be triggered by brain damage, epilepsy, and migraine, as well as stimulation of the part of the brain where the right temporal and parietal lobes meet. This region is known as the right temporal parietal junction. Goodness. And it is understood to play an important role in the multisensory integration, our sense of embodiment, feelings of agency, and self-other distinction. Stimulation of this junction can disrupt the brain's ability to coherently process the positioning of the body and the sense of body ownership, which can lead to the sensation of seeing oneself from above. And I think the reason we're really trying to explain this is that is the part of it that people have a hard time explaining or understanding. They can all understanding a feeling of love like I had coming out of surgery, but to experience yourself looking down at yourself, that's something that's completely next level, unless you really dig in and try to understand that your brain does have that ability, to kind of take yourself out of what seems to be very firmly rooted in your body.
Yeah, and again, I kind of go back to the dream thing. We've all had dreams where we see ourselves doing something. We're certainly not in our body when we see ourselves doing that. We're somehow our brain has taken us out of our body so that we're watching our body do something, that it's not really doing. So I think I don't know if it ties into this per se, but there's definitely, we've all experienced places where our brain has taken us where we aren't typically used to being at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the key phrase there is that this particular area in the brain, stimulation of it, can disrupt the brain's ability to coherently process the positioning of the body and body ownership. So we just will experience our body in a different way, which we can't really relate to except for maybe a little bit through dreams, I think. But somebody with an NDE has definitely experienced it on a whole different level, because their brain is experiencing something that it's never experienced before on a whole different level.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's look at our next slide. Okay. This is another thing that makes it very, for people, hard to say these aren't what we think they are, because this is such a weird phenomenon. Do you want to read this one, Landon?
Yeah. OBEs often also involve awareness of specific details of the scene that feature the body in a comatose state. Doctors discussing one's chances of survival, for example, or attempting CPR. In the past, accounts from people who have recovered from being unconscious or in a minimally conscious state and have recalled sensory details of their environments might have seemed miraculous. But recent studies of people who are in coma or under anesthesia and seem unresponsive have shown these individuals can perceive things in their environment and respond physically to commands. For example, while higher level semantic processes can be impaired in people with low levels of sedation or minimally impaired consciousness, a person's ability to process speech more generally has been found to be resilient even during deep sedation. So in other words, it sounds like you can, even though you're very unconscious, you can still hear and interpret what's going on around you. Your brain still does that, maybe subconsciously. You're unconscious, but subconsciously, your brain is still taking those signals and processing them.
Yeah, on a very low basic level,
low
that
level.
we are not aware of.
In the movie, they talked about a lady who they were doing they were removing something, they were doing brain surgery on her.
Yeah.
And they had completely shut down all her brain function and pulled all the blood out of her brain. And they had put these things in her ear that would go click, 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 because the brain would react to those, and they would monitor the brain function until it stopped responding to those clicks, and then they knew they'd shut the brain down enough. But just because we can measure to that level doesn't mean that there's some level that we can't measure at, that's still that subconsciously at your very lizard brain level, you're still processing some of that without at such a low level that it's not being read or monitored or something like that. So, but it's showing that there is studies that show that even when you're deeply out of it, you're still processing what's going around on the outside.
Yeah, and I think again, there are just things that we don't understand. Like in our the Good Book Club, we're reading a book about animals' instincts. Yeah, these instincts. All kinds of animals, spiders, bugs, mammals. And we forget that animals can just do these incredible things and sense things that we think we can't. But like Landon said, the lizard brain, right? There's a level that we know very little about that is cognizant and is aware, and I would think possibly could kick in these extreme situations. So we do not know. Interesting. All right, next slide. Okay, I'll let you read that one, Landon.
Okay, while no single overarching explanation for the NDE has yet been established, neuroscientists have discovered a series of neurophysiological mechanisms that could together account for many aspects of the phenomenon. One hypothesis is that NDEs are produced by the release in the brain of natural hallucinogens with neuroprotective properties. I feel like a doctor reading all this stuff. London researcher Carl Jansen, a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, is a leading expert on the hallucinogen ketamine, which is used to treat depression and during surgery as an analgesic to induce loss of consciousness and reduce pain. Jansen proposed in the 1990s that a ketamine-like substance may play a role in the emergence of NDEs among patients with life-threatening injuries or disorders of the brain or spinal cord, given the parallels between NDEs and ketamine trips and the potentially protective properties of ketamine-like substances. The dissociative anesthetic ketamine can reproduce all aspects of the near-death experience, Jansen wrote. That includes a sense of ineffability, timeliness, and what is experienced is real, that one is actually dead, a perception of separation from the body, vivid hallucinations, rapid movement through a tunnel, and emerging into the light. At least one naturally occurring substance that could play this role, called an endopsychosin, has been identified.
So that was so interesting to me, that a ketamine-like substance is given at the time of surgery to basically kind of protect you and make you calm and make you be able to just, relax during everything. And so many of the similar reactions to what people describe in an NDE. And again, this is your brain trying to protect you. I think that's our whole point. You're completely traumatized, you're going to die, and your brain kicks in to kind of say, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this also, and it's going to be all right. And ketamine kind of reproduces that. And there's also, like they said, a natural substance in your brain that is very similar to what ketamine does. So this just opens the door to a whole bunch of different possibilities, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I don't think it's I don't think it's a coincidence that the allegations are that Tim Ballard was going on ketamine trips and having these visions. In other words, he was having these experiences with the afterlife and seeing these people who were long past dead when he was on ketamine, which tells us he wasn't dying. His spirit wasn't leaving his body. It was the drug that was causing these perceptions or these reactions. And I think it's interesting. I know that a lot of people are getting into these mushrooms and the trips that you can go on with these hallucinogenic mushrooms. And the people that I've talked to they either have one of two experiences. They either feel extreme love and they tell me, oh my gosh, the love I felt, and it completely changed how my life was. I think we had Bill Rill on
an episode,
several months ago, 8 months ago or so, and he described it. And he said he could see his monkey ancestors, and he was having. So again, he's seen ancestors, he's seen past people, and he seems to recognize them as his ancestor, even though they're an evolving being that he's gone that far back. And he described the overwhelming love that he felt. And I've talked to several people who've done these, and I've heard almost the same thing. And then a smaller percentage, I've heard people who have really had a bad experience where they went to a really dark place and didn't want to try or do that ever again because it was such a dark place for them. And in the movie last night, they were showing both, that you could have a dark experience or you could have a light experience. And one guy went to hell, then he went to heaven, and then he came back. He did this whole triangle thing where he had all the experiences. So, just because some people have a dark experience and some people have a light experience does not mean it's the gospel of Jesus Christ in heaven and hell, because we see the same thing on drug trips and on ketamine and other hallucinogens. It just means that different chemicals are reacting with your brain and causing different experiences.
Right. And then, like you said, your brain is filling in the gap. If you're in a dark place, your mind is, going to go back to religious training. I'm in hell. I mean, you're going to put it in a construct. That is what human beings do. That's what our brains do. We try to make sense of it and make it familiar with something that we know. One interesting thing that I read said that a lot of people who have a negative NDE don't want to share that because they hear so many positive ones. They don't want anybody to go, well, what's wrong with you? I saw Jesus. Who did you see? So those are harder to pin down. But just like you said, Landon, just like there's a good trip and a bad trip, good NDE and bad NDE. And again, it's just your brain releasing chemicals and trying to make sense of the experience that it's having. So fascinating. Recreational ketamine can produce all aspects of the near-death experience. This is what Landon was talking about. Although many psychedelic experiences bear some similarities to NDEs, recreational ketamine trips top the list. In a massive 2019 study comparing psychedelic experiences to near-death experiences, they found that the accounts of ketamine trips most closely resembled those of NDEs. And like Landon said, it's just, right down the list of everything you can experience in each. And again, it's your brain being influenced by something and then reacting to that. So it's our brain not acting in the way it normally acts. Yes.
And that's what a near-death experience is your brain is acting in a completely different way than it normally does.
Yep. Because of what it is experiencing, whether that be a complete lack of blood, suddenly your heart has stopped pumping. That's why it's so common in cardiac arrest, because your heart stops pumping. The blood is instantly, disappearing from where it needs to be. And your brain on a lower level is scrambling, to flood you with what you need to get through that. And in the case of ketamine, you've actually taken something that's changing your brain and your brain is reacting to that. So, I mean, that's a very simplistic explanation, but.
Sure. And I, all of this stuff is very difficult science because, if the person you're studying actually dies, you don't get any feedback from them. And so, not many come back. So it's very difficult. So you're getting stories from people and trying to put it together. But it's interesting that ketamine, you can give it to people and you can recreate a very close to an NDE as possible. And as I said, I know so many people who've told me when they took these mushrooms or whatever, that it changed their life completely, that they came out with a completely different spiritual look than they did when they went in. And that's the same thing we see on NDEs. People come out either if they're previously very religious, they really double down on it and they start telling everyone and they want to share that with everybody, to say, oh, it's true, he's out there. People who are atheists change to not be atheists because they all of a sudden had an experience where they say, oh, I think I came out of my body, so there must be an afterlife.
There's something
so
more.
they take it, instead of saying that's chemicals doing it, they say, oh, that's actually a spiritual experience, and I'm going to make a change that way. Different people from different religions interpret NDEs differently and may react differently. So someone who doesn't believe in heaven and hell, who has an NDE, does not interpret that as, oh, God is there waiting for me. They just see it as, oh, a Buddhist might see it as I'm passing on to a different life. So you interpret it kind of differently based on your background, but it's interesting that we can reproduce them. And the fact that it happens a lot more under CPR patients than other patients, or accident victims or whatever, tells us that it probably has something to do with blood flow is causing some of these conditions.
Yep. I think that's absolutely correct. All right. Oh, this one is really interesting. Independently, serotonin, a neurotransmitter involved in mood, cognition, reward, learning, and memory, might play a role in certain features of the NDE. In a small placebo-controlled experiment with 13 individuals, Dr. Laurie, who we talked about before's group, assessed the experiences induced by injection of a drug called DMT that stimulates serotonin production, which triggered feelings such as entering an unearthly environment, heightened senses, feelings of peace and harmony or unity with the universe. So again, a chemical change to your brain leads to more changes, right? Where your brain tries to flood you with whatever it takes to make you be okay. Hypoxia itself has also been considered as a possible contributor. Hypoxia is sometimes experienced by fighter pilots during acceleration maneuvers, which have been documented to provoke tunnel vision, bright lights, out-of-body experiences, pleasant sensations, and visions of beloved loved ones. Now, you were a pilot, you've flown, Landon. Have you ever been close to that?
No, I don't pull those kind of G's. We can pull a few negative ones if you top up or whatever, but fighter pilots, they're pulling, 7, 8, 9 G's. They have the suits that actually inflate when they do these maneuvers to keep the blood from going down. It's like a blood pressure cuff. It keeps the blood from leaving the top of your body and being pulled down to your feet when they're doing these maneuvers. And when that happens, the blood's pulled out of their brain, just like what happens when you die. If you have a cardiac arrest and blood's not going to your brain, the blood comes out of your brain, and then they start seeing tunnel vision, and they can black out. They see tunnel vision. They see white lights. They see some of these conditions that are explained here. So again, we see conditions that very much simulate these NDEs that can be explained other than God or angels or other beings, heavens and whatnot.
Yeah, so interesting. All right, what do we have next? Oh, here we go. Okay, to attempt to confirm this is a controlled study, one group induced temporary loss of consciousness via loss of blood pressure in 42 volunteer participants and found that 16% reported out-of-body experiences, 35% reported feelings of peace and pleasantness, 17% had a vision of light, 47% felt they had entered into another world, 20% encountered preternatural beings. I know, I was trying to see natural beings, and 8% experienced a tunnel. Likewise, abnormally elevated levels of carbon dioxide in the blood, known as hypercarbia, can induce recollections of past memories, life review, visions of a light, OBEs or mystical experiences, according to research conducted in the 1950s. They were looking into this, and again in 1910.
In
Sorry,
2000.
1910. That would be pretty shocking if you could conduct this kind of experience in 1910. 2010.
And who volunteers for this? We're going to cut your blood pressure off and see what happens.
Cut all your blood pressure off. Yeah. So, they're trying to find safe ways, I think, to figure this out, and you do have to be careful with your subjects that you're working on. But again, we see when you change what's happening in your brain reacts in sort of predictable ways. These things are consistent across the board. So what do you think about this study, Landon?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And again, we have to emphasize that not everybody who has an NDE experiences any of this. Mm-hmm. In fact, the vast majority of people don't experience any of it. They don't remember anything. It's what they say, 10 to 15% or so mm-hmm. that have.
Yeah, cardiac was higher, like almost up to 20, but yeah, exactly.
20%, but there's 80% who have none of this that happens. Right. So, or can't remember any of this happening. If it did happen, it's likely that it happened and they just don't remember it, as happens in a lot of times when these things happen. So, these don't seem out of the things that are being described in the NDEs do not really justify being miraculous or proof of anything, because we can simulate the same thing by changing blood pressure, changing chemical makeups. And that's the point here.
Yeah, that is the point here. And I think we saw in the movie last night, a lot of people did not want to talk about this early on because nobody was talking about it, right? And a lot of people that were interviewed for some of these studies decades ago, they're like, people will think I was crazy. I didn't want to tell anybody, or I did tell everybody and I lost everything. My family left me. They thought I was absolutely insane. And so now the research is starting to come out because people are talking about it. But yeah, there's definitely something there. Okay, so there was another article that we came across, I think just about a day or so ago, because we're just kind of immersing ourselves all in this. And I thought this did a really good job of kind of explaining and getting to the point of what we've been trying to talk about. And this, there was a study called Awareness During Resuscitation, a multi-center study of consciousness and awareness in cardiac arrest. And this is done by a doctor who is an expert in resuscitation. This study just came out in July. So this is one of the very newest things that you can find. And they really delved into this, what happens during resuscitation and NDEs. Do you want to read this, Landon?
Yeah, I'm going to read it off this side screen here because it's got quite a bit on it. Millions of people have reported near-death experiences since cardiopulmonary resuscitation, better known as CPR, was invented in 1960, said Dr. Sam Parnia, an NYU Langone health intensive care physician who has researched the phenomena for decades. Parnia is the senior author of a new study designed to uncover what he calls the hidden consciousness of death by measuring electrical activity in the brain when the heart stops and breathing ceases. Many people report the same experience. Their consciousness became heightened and more vivid, and their thinking became sharper and clearer, all while doctors like myself are trying to revive them and think they're dead, said Parnia, an associate professor at NYU Grossman School of Medicine in New York City. They have a sensation they have separated from the body and can see and hear doctors and nurses. And they were able to report what doctors were doing to them in a 360-degree way that's inexplicable to them, he added.
Yeah, and this is from a news report, near-death experiences tied to brain activity after death, which we've attributed there. So again, they're just saying that these things are so common. The same common denominators seem to exist when breathing ceases, blood flow stops. There's something that kicks in with human beings that gives you these other sensations. So we're certainly not saying these experiences aren't real. I think that's the takeaway, because I think in the past people couldn't explain them. They said, oh, you're just hallucinating. We're not saying at all. They are real. You do experience them. The interpretation is the question, isn't it, Landon?
Yeah, that's exactly true. And it's funny because we run a book club, and in that book club, in the last 2 months, we've read two very interesting books. We read Carl Sagan's The Demon Haunted World last month, which he talks all about UFOs and how this phenomena of people seeing UFOs and how nobody saw UFOs prior to about 1940, 1950.
Mhm.
You know, people in medieval Europe did not see UFOs or report UFOs, nor did they in ancient Rome. It wasn't until UFOs became popular in popular culture that people started seeing UFOs. Similar here. Once CPR came, we saw a significant increase in the number of people having NDEs. That seemed to indicate that something that's related to CPR affects what you see in an NDE. Now, of course, because of CPR, a lot more people are surviving the heart attack to come back and tell it, which adds to this as well. But you also have that the conditions are happening mostly in those people, and that's what we're seeing is most of the NDEs are related to loss of blood flow, or the person's experiencing loss of blood to their brain. So very interesting when you look at it that way. But it's interesting that they say that as that happens, your senses actually increase, which goes along with the book we're reading this month, which is about animal instincts and all the different little. And as you read and you see the heat sensors in a pine beetle can do, and how it can find a forest fire from 100 miles away just by sensing the heat. What of those senses do we have that we never use that may, when your body starts shutting down, may come into play all of a sudden or start acting that you haven't seen? That evolution, at some point along the evolutionary chain we had, but we don't use, and maybe that's coming back, or you're experiencing things in a heightened manner because it's shutting down other senses, those senses are becoming heightened and you're seeing them in a different clarity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting observation. And just the fact that these experiences happen and then you filter it through what you know. Like I think about one of my immediate family members who had an NDE, and this family member did not grow up LDS, became LDS as an adult. So when this family member described their experience, a lot of it was sort of their religious upbringing from before, pearly gates, St. Peter. You would not hear that in an LDS description of an NDE, probably, but I understood it because I remembered that the family member had been raised, in the formative years to believe in pearly gates and St. Peter's. So the family members having this sensation, and they're, like you said before, Landon, their brain is filling in the gaps, and that's what it is. It's the pearly gates, and it's St. Peter who's going to talk to this family member. So again, the experiences, I believe, are real. You really do sense them, but then the interpretation is something else. And then what you make of that later, that's when it can be the dark side, right, Landon? Let's read this next part of the study here. In addition, people often review their entire lives. And we saw that in the movie last night, right? People were told, I want to show you everything from childhood. They remember thoughts, feelings, and events that they normally couldn't, and they begin to evaluate themselves based upon principles of morality and ethics. It's a global comprehension of their behavior throughout life where they can no longer deceive themselves, Parnia, the one who did the study, said. People also report seeing a godlike being, Parnia said, and it can be interpreted in different ways. If you happen to be a Christian, you say, I saw Jesus. And if you happen to be an atheist, you say, I saw this incredible being of love and compassion. All of this has been reported now for over 60 years. So really interesting, huh?
Yeah, I've got this flashlight from our last episode, and I liken this, that an NDE is like, if I turned on this light and you saw a light coming out, you'd see a white light. And I think all of us, no matter what your religion, no matter what your culture, no matter where you are in the world, you have this white light. You have this thing you see, and we all see the same thing. But if I take and I put a red filter over it, you're going to see red light, not a white light. If I put a green filter over it, you're going to see a green light. Well, that's how the near-death experience is. If you're Christian, I put a red filter, you filter it through Christian eyes, and you see Jesus. If I'm Muslim and I put a green light over it, you see green because that's what your religious background is. We found an article that talked about all the different belief systems and how they saw things differently. So Buddhists would see Buddha, or Hindus would see, I'm trying to remember the Hindu god, but and one of the Hindus dream in his near-death experience, he went to heaven riding on a cow. And so you interpret it the way that you, in the culturally, the way that you were brought up, and also in the way that you believe. And that's interesting when you start putting a religious connotation on it, because you just said, she saw pearly gates, or they explained being at gates, and they was a book of life and they were reading through it. Well, first off, let's think about that realistically. Why would you see a gate? Is that because you're a Western world and there's gates? What if you were a nomadic tribesman 7,000 years ago? Would you see a pearly gate? Because you didn't have gates. A gate didn't exist. There was no fences. You were nomadic. You moved. The other people said they saw, mansions and streets paved with gold. Would an Native American, Indian who died see that, or would they see teepees and a pond, which was their environment?
Their environment.
And why would it be limited to a gate that is in? If this is the most advanced civilization ever, it's heaven, it's God's place, God who's infinite, eternal, knows all. Why is he building houses and gates? Why aren't we seeing some future that's so far advanced that we've never seen? No one's coming back with, I've seen all these new advanced things that I'd never could have experienced before. They're seeing things that are familiar to them. And certainly if they'd gone somewhere different, they would be seeing things unfamiliar to them and having to describe unfamiliar things. And that's what we're not seeing. So just as I try to make sense of it and I put the filters in it, it makes sense that if you believe this and you start seeing these senses, that when you wake up again, you're trying to make sense of what just happened, and you put your religious filter on it and say, this is what that meant. And then you go share it with all your friends and they go, this is incredible. It's true. Just what we believed. But if a Muslim came and told you, I went and Allah came, and what we found was Jews found friends, that friends greeted them, not God, because they don't really believe in that God is there in the afterlife. They teach about the law and not God. All Muslims saw Allah and people who they were familiar with them. Christians would see Jesus wrapping his arms around them. So it clearly is being viewed through your religious lens, and you can't just the movie last night had a very Christian slant. They tried to put a Buddhist in there, but he was a chaplain in the military later in his life. So he certainly had Christian views, and he grew up in the U.S., so he would have been familiar with the Christian ideals, at least in that. So I found it fascinating. That was one of the questions we asked. Well, what happens if you're a different religion?
Or not religious, like you said. It even says in there, people that are agnostic or atheists, they sense this love, they sense maybe a being, but it's not tied to any religious ideology. However, many times later, after an NDE, since it's such a powerful experience that's very real to them, they will then sort of seek out a religion, turn to religion to try to make sense of what happened.
Yeah, and try to place it. And And it really is fascinating when you think about it, because, I don't think we found any stories where a Buddhist died, went to heaven, Jesus came up, wrapped his arms around him and said, son, go back, find the missionaries, and here's Joseph Smith. He is the true prophet. Find the true church, find me and come back, like we all see in the Saturday Warrior, I must find you. I must return.
That's right. Are you going to sing that song now?
They go back to their regular life. If they were all going to the same place, they'd all be seeing and the same thing. And so there's similarities in what they see, but Julie Rowe was seeing Joseph Smith and all these other things, and these other people are not seeing Joseph Smith.
Right. Nephi, Tim
and
Ballard.
Nephi, yes.
Of course, somebody could say, God understands you and God is going to show you himself in a form that makes sense to you. something like that your brain can understand. They could say something like that.
They could say that, but then what's the purpose of a church that's true if God is going to reveal himself in whatever religion that you're a part of? The whole Mormon doctrine falls apart if that's the argument that you want to make. If the Mormon church is true and that's God's true church, and no one has said that they had to show signs and tokens and stuff to get into heaven. That was never part of any of the ones we saw. Even the one produced by Angel Studios never talked about that. Right. So you can't just say, oh, there was a light and Jesus was there and that's proof that God lives and that all of this is correct and I'm on the right side and all that. There's a simpler explanation, and that is that all of our brains as humans act the same, have the same chemical reactions, which let us seeing people you love. That would make sense that as you're dying, people that you loved in life would reappear in your mind as the last thoughts of what
it's accessing memories.
Yes,
for sure.
Accessing
your brain
memories.
Is accessing the memories. Yeah. So, wow. Blowing my mind. That's all I can say. Let's go to our next one.
It's fun to talk about.
No, it is really fun. And that's why I go back to that slide about 40 back. I know our viewers are like, good heavens. But this is such an interesting topic. And to me, this is more interesting than I went to the other side and saw something. This idea of what the human brain, what the human mind that we can't even fathom can do is absolutely incredible, and that people are looking into it. All right, let's read this next one. You can read this one, Landon.
Okay. Other work suggests that some kind of last gasp survival mechanism may be at work when near-death experiences occur, in which the brain marshals all of its remaining resources to try to keep itself alive. Recent EEG studies in humans and rodents seem to show highly coherent electrical activity in the brain just before death. Researchers who have studied brains in the throes of electrical surges just before death have posited that they represent a last gasp attempt by the brain to survive a lethal loss of blood flow, which could serve as an evolutionary survival event. Why some people experience these surges and others don't, and how they are set in motion, is unknown.
Yeah. See, to me, that's a very pivotal, both those paragraphs are very pivotal, because think about the things that your body does that you don't have any control over to protect you. Like if you're in an accident, you go into shock, that is a way to protect you, to sort of shut you down as healing begins. There's a bacteria, you have an infection, your body heats up to try to kill it. I mean, these are very simplistic. You have fight or flight that just kicks in, things you have absolutely no control over. And this idea that the very last gasp of your brain recognizing that it's going to die, it floods you with these chemicals, it gives you this peace, it gives you these memories, it gives you these experiences, just so you kind of go out in a peaceful way. And to some people, they find that comforting. If they don't believe that it has a religious component to it, they think, you know what, I can think of my loved one that passed away, and in their last moments it was love, like they said. I mean, I can see how that would be peaceful.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from computers in this. You're on a temporary computer right now because yours died as we were trying to film this, and it just went click and stopped because you think it overheated or something. Yeah. But other times, you get the blue screen of death and the fan goes and it starts whirring, trying to cool the computer. It's doing everything it can to try to keep the computer alive before it shuts it down, and then finally it shuts it down, and it starts, and your brain seems to do the same thing. In some cases, it just does that. In other cases, it's got the capacity to try to shut it down in an orderly manner, and it tries to start taking everything from your extremities and keeping the vital organs first, and then it brings that into, and it tries to, the last thing it's trying to do is keep that blood flow to the brain, because that controls everything. And so it's systematically shutting down systems and sending signals even as you're dying. And it's just evolutionary prospects of a brain when you think how it's evolved over the 4.5 billion years of Earth's existence. And animals have been 3.8 billion of that. Billions and billions of animals that this evolution has created this system that shuts itself down. Just shows you that how awesome nature is in its capacity.
Yep. That I think that's something you both gained from that, is just going, human beings. Wow. Like, wow. And we really don't even know a fraction of what we could know.
And if
I
you
mean, we
believe
can
in
see a
God,
difference.
you can even say God's the one that
Yes.
that created it so that
Yep.
so it shuts down that way.
Mhm.
But the part to learn is that the brain does that, and the
Yep.
brain produces those things, and that there is answers that we can't just make a jump from, I saw this, therefore that proves that this is true. You
Mhm.
have to look at other more plausible answers, and the brain chemistry is definitely something we can measure and test and see that it will give you that reaction.
Yep, I think we're winding down here. We're shutting off. I think we just have a few more slides. So, in other words, and I'll let you read these two paragraphs, Landon, as we finish here.
Okay, near-death experience findings. The study most compellingly revelation is the discovery that approximately 40% of individuals who receive cardiopulmonary resuscitation during cardiac arrest report experiencing a range of vivid memories and dreamlike episodes. These experiences encompass various forms of perception, including auditory and visual sensations. Notably, some individuals report a sustained state of awareness during these episodes, with some experiences spanning up to an entire hour. These findings provide crucial evidence that the phenomena of near-death experiences is far more complex and multifaceted than previously understood. So continued consciousness is the next one. One of the most astonishing aspects of the study is the concept of continued consciousness during cardiac arrest. While medical professionals may perceive patients in a state of deep coma during these critical moments, patients themselves report that their consciousness persists. They are aware of their surroundings, including the medical staff's actions and the resuscitation efforts. This stark contrast between the medical perspective and the subjective experience of the patients challenges our understanding of the boundaries of consciousness during life-threatening situations.
Exactly. So we're aware, at least on some level, which leads to all of this, I think. So, all right, I think this is our last one. Awesome. We're making it. Go ahead, Landon.
Okay. The study's approach is noteworthy for its comprehensive and meticulous nature. It was conducted across 25 major medical centers in the United States, involving a large number of medical professionals and researchers. During instances of cardiac arrest, the study methodology, the study's approach is noteworthy for its comprehensive and meticulous nature. We've got the same paragraph in there. During instances of cardiac arrest, the patients were equipped with specialized brain monitoring devices, allowing real-time tracking of brain activity. These monitors collected detailed data on the patient's brain functions second by second. Additionally, sensory equipment was employed to provide patients with audiovisual stimuli, allowing researchers to gauge their conscious response to extended stimuli. This combining of brain monitoring and sensory testing offers a comprehensive understanding of the neurological processes underlying near-death experiences. Uniquenesses of the study. Perhaps the most unique aspect of its research is its ability to validate near-death experiences as real and authentic consciousness. The findings challenge the conventional notion that these experiences are more delusions or hallucinations. Instead, the study suggests that these experiences tap into latent and often untapped regions of the brain, providing individuals with a unique and profound perspective on reality. Far from being fleeting illusions, near-death experiences are portrayed as genuine connections to altered states of consciousness. In conclusion, this study has the potential to revolutionize our understanding of near-death experiences. It provides scientific support for the claims made by those who have undergone such episodes, substantiating that these experiences are not mere tricks of the mind, but rather manifestations of consciousness in unique and extraordinary states. These findings may have profound implications for our comprehension of human consciousness, life, and death, ushering in a new era of explanation in the fields of neuroscience and psychology. The study encourages a reevaluation of the very essence of human existence and the mysteries that surround it.
And that, I think, is exactly right. This is not a religious question. It's not a religious issue. This is science. This is your brain. This is the human brain and the amazing mysteries that this is starting to unlock if you study it in the right way, kind of removed from the religious component, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And you said it before, and we need to reemphasize this again. No point are we making the argument that a near-death experience that people did not experience them. 100%, we agree the science agrees they experienced it. It's simply what's the cause of that? Is it brain? Is it function? Is it loss of signals and the brain that's causing it? Or is it this spirit that's seeing it?
Mm-hmm.
You can believe whichever one you want. Near-death experiences do happen. Out-of-body experience is something that your brain conducts and can perform. So we're simply saying that there are alternate explanations other than that your spirit is leaving your body and going to God. And you have to ask yourself some additional questions about that, because as we said, you should see everyone should be experiencing the same thing if we're all going to the same place. And I can hear more, Mormons already, well, one's going to the celestial world, one's going to, and that's why they're experiencing different things. That just doesn't line up with whatever, what different cultures, it aligns with their culture and their religious beliefs in most cases. So, and if it doesn't, then they find something that does agree with it to make it match up so they can understand it and interpret it. But in every case, the science tells us these are things your brain can do, and that it's the brain that's actually causing these near-death experiences. So they are real. They're real, and they're being experienced by the person in their brain. But we know what causes it to a great degree, but certainly not completely understand it.
Right. And I think that's very important. I think that's the main reason that we decided to do this podcast and to really focus on this research, because recent events have shown us that people give a lot of credibility to people that say they have had a near-death experience, and that they have brought back interpretations of actions, things they're supposed to do, things people that follow them are supposed to do. So just be aware that just because someone says, I had a near-death experience, it doesn't mean the veil is thin. It doesn't mean, that they know something that you don't. Be very careful in who you follow if it's just for a near-death experience, because there are all these alternate explanations. Would you agree with that, Landon?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're special, because 40% of people going through CPR, experience it. And, 20% of the overall population, that's billions of people who are having the same experience. It does not qualify you to now speak for behalf of God or any other religion because you experienced this. You're just one of billions who have experienced this in some form or other.
Yeah, because you're a human being, because we all are. And that's the bottom line. I think we go to our last slide now. I think it's our last one. Yep. Scientists haven't assembled all the pieces to explain why brains in desperate throes generate feelings of peace and joy, ineffability, and the sense of being in the presence of something transcendental. Or transcendent, sorry, not transcendental, that's funny. Perhaps our biology in its final hour is easing us gently into that good night. And I love that. Final moments, and your body is just going to make sure that it's very peaceful. And I think that can be comforting to a lot of people, to realize that it may not be that horrible experience that everybody thinks. And again, this doesn't really speak to what is next, right? Anybody could make that argument. This does not speak to what is next at all. This is sort of separate from that. And so it still leaves big questions, that you can ponder on your own.
Absolutely. Yep. It's wide open as to what's next.
It's wide open to what's next. That's right. That's exactly right. So I hope that we've shed a little light on NDEs. Again, it's very scientific. We tried to talk about it in a way that was hopefully a little more accessible from our understanding. And please be kind in the comments. I'm sure we'll have a lot of scientists going, you guys don't know what you're talking about. But we are just trying to introduce the idea of, different explanations and how amazing the human brain is and what it can do. So do you think we've covered all of it, Landon? Is there anything else that we need to bring up?
I'm sure there's stuff we haven't talked about, but that's what we've got. That's what we had time to put together. So
that's what it is. That's right. So please comment. Please let us know. Have you ever had an NDE, or just someone you loved had an NDE? I mean, I'll say this at the very end, my immediate family members that had these, I kind of lived under the shadow of those, because they had some definite things that they were told when they came back that they had to make sure that their families did. And so that was me, and so I definitely lived with this. And how do you argue with someone who says, oh no, I was told that, you're supposed to do this this or be this way. It's very difficult when somebody has that assurity, and they tell you when you're young that this is what they've experienced and therefore you need to act a certain way. So I know I'm going off on a tangent now, but I just remembered that.
Boost the genealogy as soon as somebody has an NDE in your family, because someone's coming back telling you to do their temp work.
That's exactly right. So, but again, it just proves how important it is to understand these and where they came from so that you can make a decision on how it influences you. So yeah, please comment if you've had an NDE or somebody that has, what you think about all of this. Which side do you fall on? What do you think of sort of all this research and the scientific studies? And did you learn something new that you didn't know before? We would love to hear your point of view, because I feel like this is going to become a hot topic going forward. I feel like this is a common denominator in all of these things that are happening with all the events that we've been discussing here. So yeah, please let us know what you think, and like and subscribe. If you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. And if you would like to financially support Mormonish Podcast, we have links in the show notes to Venmo and PayPal, in which you can help financially support the infrastructure of Mormonish. And we certainly do appreciate all of our viewers and our listeners. And I guess until next time, we will say goodbye for now, right? Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.